In this holy season of Lent, we reflect on the foundations of our spiritual life. And in our gospel today, we see Jesus in the desert, fasting and praying for 40 days and 40 nights. And he is hungry, and the devil comes to tempt him. Turn these stones into bread. But Jesus resists that temptation. But before we go into those temptations, let's look at the first reading from the book of Genesis, because that's really the foundation of the gospel. In our reading from Genesis, we see God has created mankind and put him in the middle of a beautiful garden. And in this garden, there are delightful fruits for mankind to taste and to eat. And the ancients used to think that those delights really represented all of human endeavor, that it represented the arts and the sciences and all the other parts of our human life, family life, friendships, that we are to taste of all of these. What does God want for us, after all? But he wants us to live life and to live it to the fullest, Jesus says. And so that means looking at our fullest potential, tasting of the fruits of the garden. But there is one tree in the garden in which there is a prohibition. And that is the tree with the fruit of knowledge of good and evil. We are not to eat of that fruit or that tree. What does that mean? To the tree of knowledge of good and evil. To the ancients, it meant knowing everything, because everything was either good or evil. And who can know everything but God alone? And so the temptation was really to be equal to God, to be independent of God, to be our own lawgiver and disregard the laws of God himself. That was the tree that was prohibited for us to partake of. And it was that tree that Adam and Eve were tempted to eat, and they failed the test. They disobeyed God. So, fast forward to the desert where Jesus is, and he is tempted to turn the stones into bread because he is hungry. The temptation for us would be to satisfy our desire for pleasure, to satisfy our desire for food and for drink and for sex. And in fact, to make them the most important part of our lives. Whatever is more important to us than God becomes our God, and we worship him. But Jesus says, not by bread alone does man live, but by every word that comes from the mouth of God. The next temptation The devil takes Jesus to Jerusalem and takes him to the highest tower, the parapet of the temple, and tempts him to cast himself down. And he would receive then all the glory and acclaim. The angels would keep him from hurting himself. And so everyone would know how important he was, and they would give him glory. And so our temptation is to live for glory, to live for acclaim, to live for fame, to make that the most important thing in our lives. But Jesus said, "You shall not test the Lord your God." And the third temptation, the devil shows Jesus all the kingdoms of the world. He says, "Bow down to me, and I will give you all of these kingdoms." The temptation for us is to power, whether it is power of wealth or political power or power in our homes and families, in our relationships, to make power the most important thing in our lives. But Jesus tells the devil, "The Lord is God alone. Him only shall you worship." And so we find ourselves tempted, as was Jesus, as were Adam and Eve, tempted to sin, tempted to be our own rule, to be equal to God. After all, that's what sin is, isn't it? To disregard God's rules for our own, to make ourselves independent of God. That is our temptation. The temptation of pride that is always there in every sin. And so Jesus offers us this Lent his grace. Grace to resist these temptations and to turn our desert into a garden once more. I have a prayer I'd like to share with you. I entitled this prayer, "The Test." Human Jesus, just like me, hungry, tired, and tested be. In the desert you faced the test. You were tempted, you, the best. Turn stones to bread, your tempter said. How can we be truly fed? Will things material satisfy? Will only the spiritual qualify? Rule the world without the cross. Why suffer you such pain and loss? Must I choose also 'tween peace and strife? Rule thou over my heart and life. Jump now off the parapet. Trust God's angels will form a net. You're always there to support me, but I too have responsibility. Human Jesus, Lord divine, in my testing help me find that you will go to any length. Jesus, Lord, to give me strength.